is 10 o'clock on a Tuesday during hurricane season, which means it's time to track the tropics from sunny Central Florida. I'm WESH 2 meteorologist Eric Burris.
And in Savannah, Georgia, I'm WJCL 22 Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson.
So, Jeremy, it's kind of getting to the end of hurricane, but hurricane season is not over with yet, and it looks like we're going to have a window of opportunity for tropical development.
Yeah, and this is something we pointed out last week. Models were hinting at this longer range, and it's still the Caribbean we're going to keep an eye on as we go through, especially that first week to maybe a week and a half of November. Really nothing threatening down there right now. And as we sometimes say, there's barely even a cloud where the area of interest is located. But this is a little more longer range, probably the next couple days, but the chance of development we think will probably go up.
Yeah, for sure. Right now, next 2 days, 0% chance of formation. Not expecting that to happen whatsoever. However, you look a little further down the way, over the next 7 days' time, National Hurricane Center giving it a 40% chance of formation. This time of year, you always have to watch around Central America because of essentially what's called CAGLOs, or a Central American gyre. Essentially, you get moisture from the Pacific pulled into the Caribbean, Caribbean moisture pulled into the Southern Gulf, and Gulf moisture pulled into the Pacific, right? Makes sense. And when you're sharing all of this humid, moist air, you have the opportunity to develop stuff. So that's why we're watching early hurricane season. This is oftentimes a development area. Certainly late hurricane season, same kind of idea. Models have been trying to figure this out, but frankly, Jeremy, they've done a terrible job because they keep saying something may try to, or at least one of them keeps saying something's going to try to develop, doesn't. So I think this is one of those difficult patterns for computer models to initialize.
Yeah, and when we say kind of a terrible job, we were talking about this last week that maybe late October, Halloween, we would already see something forming down there. Probably not going to happen. So this might be into November. And you and I are both not quite sold on some of the solutions that they're trying to put out. So probably the best thing to do is maybe look at just some model data, ensembles, and see what maybe the big picture is looking like.
Right. So this time of year, it's important to note we do see tropical development, right? Just looking at kind of the overall idea, though, usually when we get development in the Caribbean, it wants to push off to the east because there's usually cold fronts coming down through the southeastern United States, and it usually redirects things. But, we've noticed the last couple of years fewer cold fronts or more delayed cold fronts. And so because of that, it's kind of an interesting scenario where timing of cold fronts and tropical development matter. So when computer models are trying to figure this out and they're trying to figure out cold fronts, if they don't come in, if it's all dependent on timing. Timing is everything, Jeremy.
Yeah, and as you look at November as a whole, which we're almost into, there's only been four hurricanes to make landfall along the U.S. coastline. Three of those in Florida, one in North Carolina. The most recent was in 2022. So just playing the odds, hurricane in November making landfall somewhere continental U.S., the chances are very, very low.
Right. So that said, they're not none though. I mean, I think the
Correct.
percentage. No, go ahead.
No, I mean, absolutely, you're absolutely correct. It's a very low chance, but again, it is a chance, and especially if we get this low to develop down there, the water's certainly warm enough, so it could be like you have a strengthening storm lifting north, and it starts to weaken, but maybe it holds on to some sort of tropical characteristic. So that's kind of what we would be watching in November.
Right. So, Jeremy, I'm popping this up here just to kind of illustrate like water temperatures because I know off your shoreline, water temperatures are cooler, but like look out into the Gulf and the Caribbean right now.
Yeah, low to mid 80s, that would sustain or strengthen a tropical system. Water temperatures, unless you're over the Gulf Stream off the southeast coast, are much cooler, closer to 70.
Right. So, okay. All right. So that's where we're at kind of right now. But as far as the computer models go, I think that this is probably a good opportunity to chat about what the models are saying, Jeremy. You feel that?
Yeah, especially the ensembles, and then we can kind of give our opinion on the European or the
Yeah.
GFS
Yeah.
or whatever we're thinking.
Right. So let's start. We usually start with the deterministic, but maybe we start with the ensembles then. You think that's
Sure.
probably
Yeah, that's definitely good.
okay. All right. So this is kind of a look at and just to illustrate what an ensemble member is, for those of you that are kind of new to this whole idea, basically, when the operational GFS and the operational European run, they give us one output. Okay. Then like so many of us, they go back and they overthink it and overthink it. And what they overthink essentially is the ensembles. This is, for example, the GFS ensemble. There are 30 different what we call members or versions of the GFS. Now, you can look at this and get each individual one, but what's usually much easier and much more useful is to put them all on top of each other. So, for example, let's just look at this is the GFS ensemble. And by about, this is November 1st, starting to see some of those L's popping up south of the United States into the Caribbean Sea. Those L's are developing members, developing some sort of an area of low pressure. And you can see this is the top right corner is your timestamp. So 12Z, that's 7 a.m. on Wednesday, because of the time change, Wednesday, November 6th. Okay, so that's going to be mid next week. The GFS ensemble seemingly has areas east of Florida, areas west of Florida, all south, but kind of in that same ballpark. And then from there, you kind of get an idea. It's developing stuff, but there's no clear indicator of where anything would go. So I think at this point, our takeaway is that the GFS ensemble has shifted things later, but it's wide open as far as where it could go.
I mean, that's like a 1,000-mile spread.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that helps us in the sense of it's definitely showing a low or lows forming, but in the end, the location's still a bit up in the air.
Right. So that's the GFS ensemble. And I'll just run it through and you kind of see. I mean, it's not only it's a 1,000-mile spread, but you're talking like a week to 2 week spread on motion. So there's a significant question of what. I think the idea, though, is that something probably will try to form. Okay, to the European ensemble now, and we're going to roll through the 6Z. Only takes us out 144 hours, so it's just starting to develop. So we have to go back to the 0Z. But watch how ensemble members, same idea, big spread in time and in space, Jeremy. So the ensemble, each member seemingly wants to develop something. The question is what and when. And one interesting piece of this, too, is the later it seems that it wants to develop, the more it wants to edge further west or putting more of the Gulf Coast into a bit of a threat.
Yeah, and we noticed this on the 0Z run last night of the operational European, where it's really lagging the low back and in the more of the Western Caribbean. And if that's the case, you'll probably have one front sweep through maybe in the days ahead to early November, not pick up that low. And then it would have a chance to get farther west and then maybe make that turn north with another front in November, which would probably be into late week one or more likely into week two. So
Right.
I would say the European definitely in the ensemble members also has more of those moving into the Gulf.
It does. And the problem is anytime you put a system into the Gulf, then you're going to impact somebody, no matter what the strength. Um,
Hmm.
there's that, right? And then for you and I who do a lot of pattern recognition work for long range work, this is one of those doubly we don't want to get bothered by it because this is also setting up a pattern that will play us into next year as well.
Yeah, and right now, so far, we've been pretty good. We talked about how Milton was kind of caught in the transitional part of the pattern. So that's one we're going to study a lot more once we get into maybe late November, December, January, and February to see how much that plays into next hurricane season. But we're really focused on what happens after about, let's say, give or take a few days within October the 10th.
Yeah.
So what's coming up here in November, if a tropical system does get into the Gulf, that is bad news for next season.
Right. So if you've ever if you've ever really hoped for nothing, this is a good time to do that. All right, Jeremy, let's look at the operational GFS model. This is the 06Z run. Important to note, like you said, it has been wanting to develop something around Halloween, but I'm just going to roll this through real fast. That's Halloween night. It's got lowered pressures, but nothing in the Caribbean as of yet. So it's even backing up by about the 1st or 2nd of November is now when the operational GFS is finally starting to develop something in the Caribbean. And watch how it does this. The GFS keeps wanting to do, if you look around Hispaniola, you've got the 996 low south of the Dominican Republic and Haiti, and then there's a weak low north. And the GFS, for whatever reason, keeps wanting to do this weird Fujiwara thing.
Yeah, I don't know. The GFS has had some real odd runs, and that's why I don't know. Probably
But
the ensembles is what we'll kind of hang with for
yeah,
now.
watch
And then
this.
maybe by the time we get to Halloween, I really hope that there's a little more consensus of what may happen as we go through the
Right.
first probably 10 days or so in November.
Agreed. Watch the very end of this. You can see it, right, Jeremy?
Yes.
Yeah. So watch how it's got a decent low into the Bahamas around the 6th, 7th of November. Then there's a cold front coming in around the 9th, 10th, sweeps a lot of the moisture away. But watch how it's got this piece of energy south that ends up trying to trek west. Like the physics there are odd. So, it's
Right.
it but it's trying to keep this idea of low pressure in the Western Caribbean around mid-November. And that ties in more to what the European operationally is saying. And based on that too, that would take us through to, kind of this idea of a more mid-month type feature.
Right. And yeah, so basically cold front one or whatever type of trough sweeps through the southeast, if that misses in sort of pulling this or pushing it off to the northeast, then if it's way down in the Caribbean, then we would be talking about something probably 7th, 10th to 14th, somewhere likely into week 2 of November, that could finally sort of guide this off to the north and east.
Yeah.
But that would be the problem. So if the early part of the month, or maybe that first week, we have a miss and it doesn't get tugged northeast, then the chances of it going to the Gulf are, I would say, greatly increased.
Yeah. So at this point, the trends are your friends, right? But we don't love this idea of continuing to delay the formation of low pressure because based on timing of fronts right now, if it slows the development trend, then you would have more of a threat of a Gulf impact. And it's important to note, like none of us are, really excited about that idea, but that's kind of
Mm.
what we're looking at here. And I think that the ensembles are picking up on that. And frankly, that's why with hurricane season continuing, we cannot let our guard down yet. It's interesting though, Jeremy. Like I've been in TV weather now for 22 years. You've been in TV weather for probably 50 or 60. I'm just kidding. But all joking aside, right? Like for most of my career, it was Hurricane Kate in 1985 was the last hurricane to hit Florida. It's so rare to have a hurricane hit Florida. And I'm certainly not saying a hurricane hits Florida, but like we saw a storm in November hit us a couple of years ago. And just the idea that the atmosphere could set up if it forms just wrong enough for another Florida impact. Certainly that's an oddity. So let's hope that climatology continues and we are protected down here, but it's not set in stone.
No, and do you have a Canadian model? Because right now
Yeah.
the Canadian model, it goes out to 240 hours. But if you look at that 240-hour panel, that is one of the models, along with I would say the European. European's a little more delayed
Yep.
though, and not as strong at that point. But the Canadian does bring that feature farther to the
Right
west.
there.
Yep. And that would be more like the 7th into the 8th, but we think potentially it could be even delayed a little bit more than that.
Yep. Yeah. And if that's the case, or if it's right there in the eighth, and then it just wanders its way into the Gulf 9th, 10th, 11th, that's a
Right.
problem. Now, one other thing that's kind of interesting about this, I always I feel like you and I enjoy using all the tools available, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
pattern recognition or teleconnections. And there is a teleconnection that we use. And for folks that watch us a lot, they are familiar. But why don't you explain the teleconnection you and I use this time of year that kind of also gives us an idea?
Okay, so I first learned about this more when I was working in Milwaukee. Some sort of weather enthusiasts and also meteorologists kind of pointed me in this direction. So I started studying a little bit more. So, as you know, Eric and I use in most of our forecasting long range. There's a lot of ingredients, but obviously we use the LRC, which is recognizing the pattern that sets up October, November, and then being able to pick out a cycle. Well, right now, sort of our kryptonite is we don't know sort of the exact pattern in what's next. So we rely on the models, but also now we can go into our tool chest and use maybe something we don't use year round or all that much, but I think it's useful. And we look towards the North Pacific. So Eric has been able to kind of overlay a map of a hypothetical U.S. Associated with the North Pacific. So what we're looking at right here is like late October, and then you project forward about 13 to 15 days. So when I saw this appear, it was on some forecast maps like a week ago. I was like, oh my gosh, that is a strong feature. And it's actually in a place that would be tied to the tropics. And at that time, we were already looking at very long range GFS saying, hey, something could get brewing, maybe Caribbean, Gulf, Southwest Atlantic area. So I think this is something coming up that we do need to watch closely because we're starting to get all these clues, and now we're sort of tying them together, and it's just something we'll watch.
And that's around the 13th of November. So basically, this teleconnection, right? If you look around where the hypothetical Florida would be, there's an area of low pressure that this signal is showing kind of coming toward the west coast of Florida around when you fast forward it out. This happened 2 days ago in the Bering Sea, but using that teleconnection, you go about 2.5 weeks or so. So you're looking at like the 13th ish of November. So
Yeah,
that would line up with a mid-month feature, which it seems like is more the trend of the models anyway. So when you start putting these clues together, it's not cheating. It's just trying to like use the right screwdriver to use on the right screw, right? I mean, I think that that's the best way to think
yeah.
about it.
Yeah, and what we do is we're not looking for maybe the weakest of lows in the North Pacific. If we get something really strong,
Yeah.
that is when it kind of piques our attention. And this was a feature that definitely has sort of piqued our attention. So again, we're sort of yeah, as Eric said, the teleconnection type thing. We're trying to use any resource possible to
Yeah.
give us a clue, an advantage in what may happen. So clearly, we've seen how the GFS has just been really all over the place.
Yeah.
But now you have maybe the European model holding that low back in the Caribbean. You have the Canadian model saying, hey, I might try to develop this a little bit farther to the west.
Right.
So those two models would fit more what we're looking at right here sometime, likely into maybe sometime week two
Yep.
of November. So,
Well, and if you look, kind of that ridge over troubled water that you learn about, right? Like you've got the Bermuda high, you've got a cold front, and it just gives you this narrow channel for anything. And we're not suggesting that this is a tropical system even at all. It could be a non-tropical low. It could just be a little
right.
piece of energy. But there's a signal on this teleconnection, and now the models are certainly showing a signal. So you kind of just have to understand, all right, what are the models trying to do? And using this, and I think that this is something, Jeremy, you had to teach me, honestly, is don't look at the models as what they're showing, but look at what they're trying to figure out. If you were to know what it's doing, like if you use this teleconnection, you have an idea there should be this low here. Now you kind of view the models differently, I feel like. And you kind of taught me how to do that.
Yeah, and again, we use it probably most in fall, early winter when we don't have as great of a grasp on what the actual pattern or cycle may be. So we're trying to get a little lead time or advantage
Yeah.
on computer models. I know we're in basically the final month of hurricane season, so hopefully once we get past whatever little tropical activity
Right.
happens, maybe through mid-November, then hopefully the season shuts down and it's over. And then we would use more of that teleconnection to see if there's going to be a strong cold front
Right.
or maybe a severe weather threat if you get a strong cold front or a low riding up into that area. So, again, what we're doing is sort of the hypothetical map from what we've studied to overlay in that area. But really, I think anywhere from like maybe near east of the Yucatan to the Bahamas would be, if I had to say, maybe a favored location
Yeah.
for that Caribbean low to travel north or northeast. I
Yeah.
think somewhere in that direction. I'm not quite buying the harder northeast turn at the moment, unless like you showed, we get two lows that
Right.
form and one splits off, and then another one lags down there, and then eventually gets tugged north sometime in the second week in November.
I mean, you could even just have one, you could have the low that's in the, like I was thinking about this, like using climatology, etc., right? So like, all right, so we've moved, we've tracked this low through, cold front dies, bubbles up another low. Like there's a bunch of, there's a bunch of there's a bunch of tracks that could keep it all away from us, and there's a bunch of ideas that could bring us some moisture. So it's just something to watch. And I think at the end of the day, that's what we have to do with hurricane season continuing. We're definitely in the sunset part. And again, like we said, the pattern overall, climatologically, favors staying away because cold fronts come through, but it's all going to time out dependent on when those cold fronts come through. But the idea is typically this time of year, systems try to stay away from Florida, try to stay away from the United States. And as Debbie says, yeah, there's a lot of scenarios. So just watch, track, and see. And don't freak out. I think that's the biggest
Right.
thing is not to freak out because it's so easy with anxiety. Florida has been impacted so much this year. Your area has been impacted so much over the last couple of years. Tropical anxiety is a big thing. And I think what you and I try to do is to calm nerves down with knowledge and with information and with
Hmm.
scenarios.
Yeah, and I think what we're showing right now is, hey, low pressure is favored to be in this area. How strong, what it's going to look like in the end, don't really know that yet.
Yeah.
So if people are kind of cheering for no activity or for everything to stay away, then you want a stronger cold front
Yeah, 100%.
and a
And I
faster
would
one,
also
probably.
say that I, I would like cold fronts anyway. Like,
Yeah,
take any tropical mess out of here, but I, I would like cold fronts personally.
right. But as you showed, the water's still really warm in
Yeah.
the Caribbean. So if there's a low there, it may not have a tough time developing.
Yeah. So and then we could even go even further down and just kind of like discuss how the Madden Julian oscillator, like there's that too, and that's another one of those teleconnections, right? So the Madden Julian oscillation, which kind of just helps with lift and with spin, and if we roll through time, think of it as green as go. So the Pacific has kind of been turned on, but watch how getting into early November, the Gulf, the Caribbean, they go green. And so you've got a favorable, even more, I would say, more favorable environment atmospherically for tropical development. So yeah, we're going to we're going to at least have an environment open for business once again.
Yeah, and I think we've now put together a lot of clues, so we'll see kind of what ends up developing. But I would say next week
Yeah.
we'll be talking, we'll be doing tracking the tropics to get everyone's mind off anything election related.
Yeah.
Right, next Tuesday.
That yeah, for sure.
Well,
For sure.
well, if you don't want to deal with politics next week, you can come here and we'll just talk tropics,
Yeah.
tropics only.
And hopefully we'll have really good, bipartisan, really good news.
Right.
Would love to talk cold fronts and no threats whatsoever.
Yes, we want good news for everyone.
Yeah. All right. Questions, comments, concerns. Karen says, thank you and Jeremy for all the hard work you put in all year long to keep us informed. That's our goal. And I would venture on to say that like here we are entering into the calmer season, right? Atmospherically. And Jeremy and I are hard at work studying the patterns to work on our hurricane season forecast for next year. So it's already begun on in the
I
background.
Yeah, and I mean, overall, right now, we have to figure out that Milton thing, which was right at the sort of
Yeah.
start of the pattern. We'll get that pinned down, but the rest has been good news, I think, so
Yeah.
far.
Yeah. Let's
I
just keep
mean,
keep it.
the other 2 plus 2.5, 3 weeks has
Yeah.
been great news for the whole Gulf Coast,
Yeah.
Florida, and really the East Coast in terms of what may happen next season. Now, we probably have maybe another 3 plus weeks of whatever's new
Right.
technically in this. So if that ends up being busy and there's multiple lows somewhere close by, I would say that would be something to watch. Right now, though, I would say early indications. While we've been quiet,
Yeah.
I think from probably Puerto Rico to maybe the Bahamas, that
Yep.
is an area, Hispaniola, already sort of piquing my interest for next hurricane season,
Yeah.
just with kind of what's happened early on in the new part of the pattern. So
Agreed.
if this is something that would make that turn and go over those same areas again, I would say this is definitely not a good thing for them next season. But again, we'll judge later on. I mean, it's not in the grand scheme of things, not super long
Yeah.
before our new forecast comes out. Once you get to the end of this season, you just have December, January, February, and then
Right.
here we go again.
And we'll probably do an intermediate update at some point to just, we are very transparent on everything. We try to overshare, but I think that keeps everybody calm, or at least that's the goal that you and I have, is to keep everybody calm. Anxiety and that limbic system, that hijacking is when you get freaking out, that's not good for anybody. So I would agree. I would also agree that this is going to be a very interesting thing to observe one way or another, because looking at next year, you've got Oscar, that kind of was a piece of the pattern to really study, and then whatever this were to try to do, even if it doesn't become tropical, even if it's just a little nasty storm system, let's observe that, and then see if Milton played into the old only, or if Milton was kind of a carryover from old to new. It'll be very interesting to see how that goes.
Yeah, so you had some people on your page. Let's see here. I have Vanessa, Cindy, Ann, and Pam all saying hello to us.
Yeah.
And Cindy is from down to your area, Palm Bay.
Yeah, yeah. A couple of people are asking like how accurate the long range forecasting is that we do. I think that it's important to note that we never sit and try to say that anything is going to be perfect. And I'll
Right.
just dial up like our forecast for this year and the named storms just to kind of illustrate where we are, and we'll do a full wrap up kind of discussing it a little bit later on. But there's our highlighted hotspots, and there's all of the tropical paths that we had. So, I mean, I'd say Barrow was the only one that did not make landfall in a hotspot this year.
Yeah, it did. Barrel did occur within a time frame we had highlighted, but did not hit the hot spot per se. Otherwise, 5 out of 6. The other one there that's popped up in North Carolina, that was PTC,
Right.
one of those that was
PTC
not a
8.
name system, but five out of the 6 that were named went into one of the hotspot red shaded areas, which
Yep.
was from the March 1st forecast.
Yeah. So, I'm happy with our forecast. I'm happy with the numbers. We'll do a full wrap up when it's over with, but I'm happy with it. Jamie asks a question on your page, which is, I think it's a great question. Do you think that this is the last stand for hurricane season this year?
I mean, if this kind of lags into past November 10th, where whatever happens, happens,
Yeah.
it definitely could be. I mean, once you get into the back half of November, a little more difficult. So, um, I don't know. Models like the GFS wants to make it look like there's more than one name storm coming
Yeah.
up. Other models not quite on board with that, but it has to end at some point, right?
Yeah. Although there have been tropical systems every month of the year, but yes, it does have to
Mhm.
end at some point. And I think, the MJO going in phase, lack of cold fronts, like there's definitely a window for some trouble here. By the end of November, man, if we don't start getting cold fronts and shift out of the MJO, then there's a whole other discussion to study, and
Right.
that's for people that, no
Yeah.
offense to you or I, Jeremy, but they usually have DR next to their names.
Right. Yes. But yeah, I think once we get through this if there is some sort of development
Yeah.
here in the front half of the month, I would definitely think the back half looks a little quieter. And also, there are some signs of some stronger cold fronts maybe
Yes.
coming in as we get to mid or late months. So that would probably sort of put an end to things. And then maybe you get a little lagging system down in the Caribbean that's brief that pops up but doesn't head north. So something like that's always possible too.
Mother Nature. Mother Nature. All right,
Hmm.
let's talk numbers, Jeremy. First off, named storms. 15 named storms so far this season. The average through today is 13 and change. Last year we had 20 named storms. Remember the fact that last year we had 5 more named storms than this year, because the ACE number really lines up to that. And we'll get to that in a minute. But first, Jeremy, you want to talk about named storm days?
Yeah, the average is 64, and we're actually pretty close to average. Maybe we'll add on to that number a bit. Last year we had 100. So, at least in terms of name storms and name storm days, last year was more active. You'll probably pop up the ACE here next,
Yeah.
which we really saw this number jump late season this year.
Mm-hmm.
So, that number, no question, is going to finish above average. And if we would get one more storm to develop, we'll probably top last year's ACE score. Because remember, November last year, we did not have any name storms.
Right. And last year's A score through today was 148.2. We're sitting at 145. So we're almost there, but with 5 fewer storms. So doesn't that tell you the idea that
Hmm.
this year, exactly as we had expected, Jeremy, the storms that developed had a higher intensity overall?
Yeah, and our forecast was 16 to 20 named storms. So we'll see if we end up getting a couple more named storms landing within that. So that would be good. Right now, if we had a hurricane develop, we would be maybe one outside of our forecast for that. And certainly hoping we don't have a major
Yeah.
hurricane this late in the season.
Yeah. Well, so we'll watch, we'll wait. And again, yeah, we're going to have live team coverage on everything not election related next Tuesday, which is it's crazy that we're there. Yeah. I think we can get bipartisan support from both sides of the aisle with an idea and desire of cold fronts and no tropical systems.
I think if we ran a campaign that said no hurricanes, we would win, right?
If
Everyone agrees on
not,
that.
doesn't that say something?
All right.
All right. That's all I've got. You have anything else?
No, I guess next week, hopefully we'll have a much better idea. And maybe even by next week, if it's, what is that, the 5th or something,
Yeah.
we would have an invest or something if there is a low down there and then a little better idea on some of the spaghetti plots
Yeah.
and other tracks.
Works for me. All right, everybody, listen. From sunny Central Florida, I'm Wesh 2 meteorologist Eric Burris.
And in Savannah, Georgia, on WJCL 22, Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson.
See you later.